But let me just tell you, like, there were things that he did that were like, they weren't just like, let me just put a little tabby in his file and
Let's just
like
make a
make
little
sure
note.
people like he should have been imprisoned when he was like 16 years old for the things he was doing.
Hi, I'm Lila.
And I'm Chansey.
And this is For Crying Out Loud.
We're going to regale you with stories of murder today. To start off with, there's just this weird story I heard that I wanted to share because it's weird. There was this guy who called 911 from the bottom of a cliff because he claimed he had been chased by a bear off of the cliff, and then from the bottom of the cliff he called 911 and he was like, "Bro, I'm broken and dying and I need help." And so investigators and search and rescue people, they show up to try and find him, and they find a dead man's body in the woods. And they thought it was this guy that called, but then they find out that it wasn't.
No.
It was somebody else. So they find the actual person that ran off the cliff, and he had been trying to claim the identity of the dead man, and they were really confused. They were like, "What's happening? This is weird." So they take him to the hospital, whatever. And then he runs from the hospital and he's like on the lam, and they discover that he has like a record and he's been stealing people's identities and their money forever. And he's trying to leave the country. And so they like arrest him. And anyways, he killed that guy for his identity. He lured him into the woods and then killed him and tried to assume his identity. And then he got chased by a bear and then off a cliff. And he almost died.
Sucks. Gee.
It was pretty instant karma.
What a story.
Like, I think that's, yeah. It was wild. It was literally instant. Like, kill somebody, boom, bear.
Bear
kills
kills
pretty
you.
Crazy. I think it's the first time he killed anybody, too. Like, he'd stolen people's identities before. That was most of what his record was. But he hadn't killed anybody before. And the instant he did, a bear tried to kill him.
Shouldn't have done it, bruh. Shouldn't have done it.
So, anyways, that's my weird bear murder story at the beginning. So
there you go.
Yeah, there you
go. Bear murder.
Yep, bear murder. Well, sort of. But we're not talking about bears today. We are talking about murder. I feel like we talk about bears a lot. Is that just me? I feel like we've talked a lot about bears on this.
Definitely talked about bears more times than is normal for any human being. But that's okay.
I don't know why, but I really like bears. They're like one of my favorite animals. So I guess I just bring them up a lot. If I could have a wild animal as a pet, it would be a bear. Like, I want a grizzly bear that's like tame. I think that would be cute.
No, I'm all good.
I don't know. Just saying.
I'd have like a not something big that could eat me.
But it's tame. Like, this is just fantasy. Like, I want a big bear, like a grizzly, and possibly like a tiger or something.
Yeah.
If it wasn't like bad, you know?
Maybe.
I was like, no, I just like dogs. I think I'll just stick with that.
Don't think I'd ever trust it, even if it was supposedly never gonna eat me.
Okay, I get what you're saying. You have a really great imagination. Today we're going to talk about a serial killer. We haven't talked about one of these guys in a while. So we're talking about probably one of the worst ones I've ever heard. So buckle in, everybody. I'd say he's somewhere between the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper in horribleness. Just like somewhere in the middle there. So you're welcome.
Awesome.
So today we are talking about the Green River Killer, aka Gary Ridgway. This is one of those ones that I'm pretty sure like everybody has heard the name, the Green River Killer, but they probably don't know anything about his crimes or anything. So it'll be
Yeah, I agree
interesting
with that. I've heard
because
the name, but I don't actually remember that much about him.
yeah, like I have listened to true crime podcasts for like literally like years and years now, and his name has come up. Like they've talked about it. Lots of people that I've like listened to have talked about it, but they never like they just assume everybody knows what they're talking about because of how like well known this guy is. So I don't actually know. I didn't know that much until I started researching him. So um, he's a bad one. So everybody just strap in. So we're gonna start with a little bit of background into Gary Ridgway, and then we're just gonna kind of go from there. So, um, just to try and picture him, I mean, look up a picture of him so you know what we're working with here. But just to like give a good idea of who Gary was, that kind of energy he gives. If he was an animal, he'd be a shark. He's got definite dead eye shark energy, like most serial killers do, where they just have like nothing going on back there. It's just dead. Um, and he's had that since he was a little kid. So there was something kind of off from the beginning. He was born on February 18th in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is a bummer
Oh,
because
oh
we were
wowzers.
both born in Utah. We lived our lives, most of them there.
An hour away from there.
Literally, I'm
Just
like,
about.
such a bummer thinking that he
Yeah.
lived here
He
at all.
he looks like just what you'd imagine him to be.
Like, yeah, you
100%.
look at him and it's like if I saw him walking down the street, I would think to myself, that man is a serial killer. Like, he
Yeah.
literally looks like what you'd think a serial killer would look
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, basically there's just like something about his face. It's not right.
It's the way that his emotions just don't play right, man. There's nothing there. It's just blank slate. Anyways, yeah. He's your typical average looking white man, but he just has this extra like dead-eyed thing. So, anyways, that's who he is. Like I said, he was born in 1949 in Utah, which makes him an Aquarius, which is just a random fact that I saw somewhere while I was researching. If you look up what an Aquarius is, like what they're known for, they're supposed to be humanitarians. So I put very little stock in zodiac signs because
Yeah, I think you
he's
can
the
see what you
opposite of
want
a
to see
humanitarian. Yeah, it's
from
just
that
not great.
stuff. So,
Anyways, yeah, so he did not live up to his zodiac sign. We'll just put it that way. Um, as is pretty common for serial killers, Ridgway's childhood was basically the stuff of nightmares. Like it was just not a happy place. Not all people that have bad childhoods and bad home lives become serial killers, but it does seem to be a pretty consistent factor in the making of a serial killer. So, he definitely had that. He lived with his family in Utah for about 11 years before they moved to the Seattle area. And then he basically lived the rest of his life in the Seattle area. He never really left. Ridgway's parents were Mary Rita and Tom Ridgway.
Tom.
And Tom. Mary Rita and Tom. It's kind of weird. Simple names. Mary was a saleswoman who worked in the men's section of a local department store. And Ridgway would later say that his mother dressed in a very provocative way on purpose to try and entice gentlemen and to be weird. I don't know how true that
Okay.
is because this was Ridgway's talking about his childhood, and he's obviously not a super reliable source of information because he's not a good person. So who knows what was actually going on, but it can't be denied that she was a pretty terrible mother. Like she was not blessed with much of a maternal instinct at all. She was domineering, She was abusive towards not only Ridgway, but his siblings and their father. It was just like a bad situation.
Yeesh.
And even though she kind of picked, like, she was abusive to everybody, she really, really picked on Ridgway. Like, she would really focus her efforts of meanness on him. For instance, Gary would later say that he thought his mother disliked him because of how low his IQ was, because she'd had him
Oof.
tested with like a mental aptitude test when he was younger, and he had an IQ of 82, which is below average. It's not like the worst, but it's definitely not the best. And his mother would use that to threaten him and say that she was going to send him away to an institution because of how dumb he was. Like every time he
Gee.
did something that she didn't like.
Yeah, I'm just like kind of laughing, not because it's funny, but just because of how like brutal that is. Like,
That's horrible.
oof, lady, you're a piece of work.
The psychological abuse, like
Like,
every time to threaten to send your
yeesh.
kid away is bad enough, but then to do it because of how dumb they are is like not great
How
either.
far below average is that score?
It's not
It's
that
not
far
that
below
far,
average.
right? Like,
No, I think the average is, I'm going to look it up right now because I want to know. So this article says, yeah, this article says between 85 to 100 is like that average. Anything less
yeah.
than 70 is like considered learning disability or something like that. So he was like not that far off of average. Like it wasn't
No.
anything crazy. I mean, he did struggle in school, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but like that could have just been all the stuff that was happening at home too. So who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he wasn't,
Well, also,
he
it's like,
wasn't
even if he
actually
had,
unintelligent. He was just average.
yeah, like, even if he had, like, a learning disability, it doesn't, like, make him dumb. It just makes him a
No, it
slow
doesn't.
learner.
Yeah, it just changes how you learn things and how your brain processes information. It doesn't make you
So,
stupid.
it's not.
So,
And also, IQ tests, like, that, back in this time period have basically been, like, disregarded. They don't actually
yeah,
measure
because
intelligence that well. Because how do you
it was
measure
like the
intelligence with a
50s or
friggin' piece of
what are you
paper?
going to do? Yeah. No.
So,
So, he honestly like wasn't the dumbest ever. So, I don't know why his mom was so focused on it, but she was. I think it was just a way to like make him feel bad all the time.
yeah, have control over
Um,
him.
yeah, control him, make him feel like garbage, be a bully, all that stuff. Um, because of like lots of different things, Ridgway had issues wetting the bed until he was into his teen years, which is interesting because anybody who's like learned anything about serial killers knows that there's this thing called the McDonald triad. It's like the three things that all serial killers do. Like they
Yeah.
do the animal cruelty thing, and they like starting fires, and then they wet the bed long past when they're supposed to. That's like what this theory is, this McDonald triad. And he definitely fits at least two of those things. So that's interesting. But he like
Yeah.
had persistent issues with it into his teen years, the
That's
bedwetting
hard.
thing, which is
That's
really
hard.
hard and sometimes can be linked to childhood abuse. So it's like
Right.
an interesting thing. But these instances of bedwetting were like extra traumatizing because of how his mother responded to them. She like would order him to strip out of his clothes in front of her and anybody else who was in the room. And then she would march him naked into the bathroom and insist on cleaning and washing him herself, including his private areas, which are not appropriate for a mother to be touching past a certain age.
Yeah,
But
it's
she would do it
gross.
anyways. And she would do like this whole thing like in front of the family, not the showering obviously, but like she would basically like humiliate him and make him parade out in front of his family after this happened, and then she would basically like grope him in the bathroom. And I don't know, it's just like beyond
Gross.
inappropriate for sure. It seems like some kind of assault to me to like touch your teenage son in that way, but I don't know. I don't know.
No, it
This is just
definitely is.
like, yeah, this is just like, this is the kind of environment he was growing up in. Obviously, not a good one. I don't like his father was also, he wasn't like mean to him, but he also didn't help. Like, he was always very crude about sex in front of Gary, like with Gary. For example, his father would like point at sex workers and point them out to Ridgway when he was young, and then tell him that they were dirty and that they dressed inappropriately and that they were begging to be raped. That's a quote.
Oh,
So that's how his father would talk about women in front of him, talk about sex workers specifically, but he also talked about his wife that way, like that she
oh,
was like a whore is the word he used because of the way she dressed. So
yeah. Wow. Okay.
just like literally mixing all of the things up for Ridgway at a very young age. Like sex is all messed up, women are all messed up in his head. I mean, his mother treats him like garbage anyways, and his dad's saying all these horrible things about women. So like there it's basically just like a perfect cocktail to like grow up hating women, basically. He's just gonna hate women. That's just where he's at. So, like I said, not a great start to his life. But on top of that, Ridgway was just kind of off from the very beginning. Like before his parents really messed him up, there just seemed to be something like kind of weird. Ridgway later, like he would later say that when he was in elementary school, he started fantasizing about murder, like the idea of killing
Ah,
someone, which is
ah.
like just
Okay.
not a normal thing that 6 year
No,
olds do or 8 year
not that
olds do.
young.
Especially like even if they're in a really horrible situation, which is just not a normal thing for a kid of any age to be doing, basically is. And he started in elementary school, he started following his classmates, like stalking them, basically. He
That's
didn't do
totally
anything to his
normal.
classmates, but
Yeah.
he would follow them around, and he didn't know why he was doing it. He just liked it. And then
Yeah.
when he reached junior high, the behavior started escalating. So it's like you can tell from the beginning that there was just something just wrong. Like there was just
See,
something wrong.
this is like when I just feel like I relate to this being a teacher. This is when I feel like there should be a way to like peg people and like put them on a watch list. He's like, I have
Yeah.
had students before that I have literally been like, you're psycho. You're going to grow up and murder people one day. Like, I
Yeah.
had a
And
student
like
last year that I am convinced is a sociopath. Very, very convinced. And I wish I could put a little tag on him in
just
public
like a note.
records and be like, just watch that one,
Just
please.
watch this one, please.
Something's weird.
Cuz
It's not
something's
right.
off. Yeah. And
So,
I wish that there was a system for that, but you also don't want to do that just in case like they become fine. Like they're not. But like in these situations, like this is not good. And it's like, hindsight is 2020. You can look back and you can be like, this behavior was clearly broken. But let me just tell you, like, there were things that he did that were like, they weren't just like, let me just put a little tabby in his file and
let's just
like
make a
make
little
sure
note.
people like he should have been imprisoned when he was like 16 years old for the things he was doing. Clearly he didn't get caught, or else he probably would have, because he didn't even have a record. But he did things that like are no bueno. So for instance, in junior high, he went from just like following his classmates in general to specifically following girls from school
Oh,
back to their homes, and he
oh,
would watch them.
okay. Oh,
And he said that it was like it was a sex thing. Like they
oh,
were
okay.
attractive, and he liked the whole stalking them and watching them without them knowing thing. He
Yep.
was basically a
Weird.
peeping Tom. So That's great. And then also in junior high, when he was in his teens, he started using a BB gun to torture and kill animals in the neighborhood,
Oh,
just like birds and cats and such.
okay.
And it's so there we are again with the McDonald trifecta thing, the triad.
Yeah, he's
He's
checking them
now done
off.
2 of the 3 things. And he doesn't ever do the third thing, which is setting fires. At least to our knowledge, it never came up in my research. But like 2 out of 3 is still pretty bad. So it's not great. And just so we're all aware, the McDonald triad thing, like it's just a theory. It's never been like proven to be super accurate,
Yeah, but
but
also it's
it
like,
is
have
consistent.
you ever met anybody that like a normal human being that like tortures and kills animals?
No, I've never met
Like the
one.
wetting the bed thing, whatever. But
That
like
can
it's the
happen.
torturing and killing animals that I'm like, that ain't
The animal
normal.
cruelty
And you
thing
can't
is
deny the
not
fact
normal.
that like, yeah, normal
There's
people are
something
not
broken
doing
in
that.
children that do that. Yeah. That's just not how things work. Um and the whole like small animals thing that went on for a while, like using the BB gun to kill animals and things. But eventually it wasn't enough for him and he felt the need to like level up his violent behavior. And he literally went from like 25 out of 100, which is like pretty bad. Like killing animals is like bad. But then he went to like literally 100 out of 100 in badness. When he was 15 or 16, he was just like walking down the street one day and he saw this first grader from his neighborhood just like playing in the bushes on a street corner up ahead. And he was like, okay, cool. So he walked up to this boy and asked the boy if he wanted to play. And once they were like a little further away from the street, Ridgway pulled out a knife and just stabbed the boy in the side for absolutely no reason. He just stabbed him. And the victim of this crime would later recall, quote, he started laughing and he had a smile on his face, end quote.
Yeah, I would qualify all of that as totally normal.
Totally
Uh
normal teenage behavior,
why
right?
at this point did he not get like thrown in jail?
Well,
Did
what
they not
happened
know who
is
did it?
they didn't know who did it. Ridgway stood there for a minute and watched the boy bleed out.
Oh,
And
awesome.
he then wiped the blade off on the kid's shirt. And then he smiled again and walked away.
Stellar.
And as he was walking away, he told the boy, "I always wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody." And then he just left and he was laughing. So
Well, now you know, I guess. You little punk.
the kid didn't
Not even
die.
the right word,
That's the
but
thing. The kid didn't die. He survived,
that's a
but
miracle.
he couldn't identify Ridgway. He didn't know who he was. And so Ridgway never faced any consequences for it. But he later came out and said that's who it was that did this to me. So that's horrifying.
Yeah.
I don't know who does that. I've honestly never even like heard of a serial killer that's done something like that. This is the only time I've ever heard of anybody,
Well, it's just so
any
like
serial killer doing
random.
that.
It's just
He
like,
just like
and
it
young.
wasn't.
Like
Yeah, he's
most serial
so
killers
young.
don't manifest that kind of behavior in their teen years. They
No, and
fantasize about
this.
it.
Oh yeah,
They
and
want to do
sometimes
it,
they'll
but
do
they
violent
don't commit
things.
yet.
Yeah, but they don't actually. There are obviously exceptions to that. I think Jeffrey Dahmer killed people when he was this age, but like that's very rare, even for serial killers.
Well, and even it's like
And
young kids too. It's like that's a 6-year-old.
yeah, well, and that's the thing is like this was a crime of opportunity. He did not like intend to do anything to this boy. He didn't really even know who this boy was. He just saw him on the street and then just went up to him and decided to
I'm
try
gonna
and kill
stab
him.
you.
Yeah, he like there was no forethought because he was more focused on women. That's his target, really, based on most of his behavior. It was just like a weird, almost like he said like he wanted to know what it felt like. He'd been fantasizing about it since he was in elementary school, and it just seemed like a dam broke, and he just it was the perfect opportunity, which is
Well,
just
it's so
horrible.
creepy that he's like laughing and and smiling, and he's like waiting around to like watch this kid who's in pain. It's just so
Yeah. He
icky.
like stuck around until he felt like he couldn't anymore, and he walked off. Like, that's a traumatizing thing to have happen to you when you're like 7 years old. That's horrible.
So like this is like a question that I don't know. Does the murder itself like sexually arouse serial killers? Like the
I don't
murder
know.
itself.
I don't know if it does or not. I think it does though. They don't. I like for. We'll talk a little bit more about Ridgway and what he does and his motives. It'll probably be in the second part of this episode, but he does talk about that, and I don't even think they know really what it is that they feel when they do this sort
Hmm.
of thing.
I just like
Because
I'm
for
just trying to I don't know, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. Like what
yeah,
they
like
fantasize about it,
what
but
is
like
it?
what are they
What are they
fantasizing? Like
getting out
what
of it? Like
feeling is
why?
that giving them?
Yeah.
It's so
And
gross.
Gary, he would say later that it was a release, which it seems sexual because it was always tied up with him doing sexual things with women before he killed them. So it seems like it was an extension of that. But he
Hmm.
didn't really know or understand it. And neither does anybody else because there's no
That's just
logical
not
rational way that makes sense because
yeah,
it doesn't.
not normal.
So, I don't know. It's interesting to think about because the second time that he does something violent in his teens that we know about, and this is something that he confessed to, but there's no like solid evidence, so we don't know for sure if he did this, but he said that he did. When he was in his later teen years, he said that he killed his first victim, and it wasn't a woman because all of his other victims were women. But he said the first time he had been swimming in a local lake with some boys, and this boy and him were like basically alone in this lake, and he decided that he was going to drown him. And so he like wrapped his arms and legs around this kid and held him underwater until he died. And then he just left him there.
Oh,
And like I said, there's no proof of this. Like there's no way to prove that he actually did what he said he did. But there were two boys that were found drowned in that lake around the time Ridgway would have been the age he says he was when this happened. So you never know. It's
gee.
possible. But
Yeah.
either way, like he was obviously like thinking about this stuff at this age.
Yeah.
It
Obviously.
almost like I went a little Criminal Minds here when I was thinking about it because it almost seems like he was testing different ways to kill people. Like he stabbed the first
Yeah.
kid, he drowned the second kid. Like he was testing what he liked almost, which is just horrible. But like in Criminal Minds, they talk about that, and I know it's Criminal Minds, and I'm not saying that they're like 100% psychology based or whatever, but it is interesting to think about like him testing methodologies almost, which is just
Yeah.
terrible. Um. Anyways, so this is like literally where he's like 18 years old at this point, and he's already apparently killed somebody, tried to kill somebody else, killed a bunch of animals. He's been stalking people. Like, wow,
He's got
just
a whole
not good.
slew of it, and he's
He's got
not
lots
even
of
an
bad
adult.
stuff. Oh yeah,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
or
it's terrible. So by the time he was in his early 20s, things like had definitely escalated in a different way. He wasn't just generally violent anymore. He was now sexually violent. He, in the late 1960s, was driving home and he saw this girl, this young woman, on the side of the road. She was in her teens. And he offered her a ride and she accepted because apparently in the 60s and 70s, it was just like, let's just get into random people's cars.
everybody was just
Let's
like,
just do it.
nah, everybody's cool. Let's do this.
Every time I see a hitchhiker, I think to myself, either
Do
they're
you
a
want to die
murderer
today?
or I'm a murderer. I'm not going to pick them up. Who would trust that I'm not going to kill them or that they're not going to kill me. We don't live in the kind of world where you can just like pick up random girls and not kill them. Like that's just hitchhiking shouldn't exist. It should be illegal. I don't know if it is or not,
I
honestly, but it
feel
should
like it
be.
is now,
I
but
think it
I
is.
don't know. Well, I think it depends on the state, actually. It's not illegal everywhere, but
Oh, well, it should
restricted.
be.
Like, in my state, it is illegal. Actually, it is illegal in 44 of 50 states, according to that
It's
source.
legal in
It's
44 of
illegal
50
in
states.
44.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. So
this
that means
map,
most states.
yeah, I don't know. This map on Reddit, which it's Reddit, so who knows?
Take it with a grain of
Yeah,
salt.
it shows that like Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and then I don't know. There's a little looks like Delaware and New Jersey. It's like illegal.
Okay, so that's weird. So it's illegal basically only
Huh.
in one spot
Yeah, just
of the
like in this
country.
this area
I wonder if that's
according
because
to
of how many
that
serial
source.
killers have killed people
That's
because of
literally what I
hitchhiking in this
thought.
area.
I was like, but you'd think it would also extend into like Washington and Oregon
Yeah, and
because that also has
California and
been,
stuff.
yeah, but maybe not. I don't know. Interesting. Who
That is
knows?
weird.
I don't even know if these
Well,
sources are legitimate. So,
who
because I'm
knows?
also finding, like, now I'm seeing like 3 other maps on Reddit and they all have different states. So, maybe
That's
I'm
what we
not
get for
right about
using Reddit.
anything.
Well, in
I'm
any
like,
case,
this one also says Idaho and Nevada. So, apparently, and New Jersey and Delaware, like I said, but this one has Texas on there instead of Utah.
hmm,
Who knows? Either way, it seems like
who
Idaho,
knows?
Nevada, and New Jersey and Delaware, it's definitely illegal. So if you live in
It's a
those states,
no-no.
don't
Don't
hitchhike.
hitchhike.
Okay.
All right. Well, in any case, this woman, she's not named because she doesn't need to be named. She accepted Ridgway's invitation to drive her home, and she got into his car. And once she was inside, he literally just straight up asked her to have sex with him, and basically said that he'd pay her for it, and then started molesting her. Like he grabbed her chest and tried to force her to have sex with him. And they hadn't driven anywhere, so she told him, let me
No.
out of this car
I'm
right
going to leave
now.
now.
And he did. He opened the door and he let her out. Um Eventually that wouldn't be an option for the women that he targeted, but in this case he let her go.
It's
So
like funny because it's almost like he didn't anticipate that happening
like,
and then he
well, I
didn't
don't
know
think
how
he
to
did.
react. I think
I
he was just
think
like, they're gonna have sex with me if I
yeah.
ask. Like a
I think his
weirdo.
dad had warped his head so much about women, like he just assumed that like all women were basically sex workers, like that they would just have sex with him if he paid them or offered them something, which is just like clearly not how the world works. But he didn't really get how the world worked because he lived in his own little universe. So whatever. Ridgway, like I said, he struggled with school a lot. So he didn't actually graduate high school until he was about 20 years old. He got held back for 2 years. And so while he was in school, he met a girl named Claudia Craig. And they dated for a while. They were high school sweethearts, I guess. And then when she was 19, after Ridgway finally graduated high school, they got married. It was 1969.
What a great
Summer of
life
love.
choice.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
a really great life choice on her part. Luckily,
Let's marry a serial
um,
killer.
yeah. Can you imagine finding out? Anyways, this is not his only marriage, so she wasn't actually with him when he actually started killing, like really killing people. But um, because Ridgway had bad grades, he couldn't get into college, so he joined the Navy, and this was like he got sent to Vietnam. So he's actually a war veteran because he saw combat, and he worked on a board and supply ship. And in between all of his duties, he'd left his wife at home, obviously, but he still made time for sex workers when he was at port in Vietnam. And one of them gave him gonorrhea at one point, which he was like very upset about.
That's what you get.
But despite that, he kept having unprotected sex with sex workers. So I don't feel like he was that upset because he didn't change anything
He
about what he
was
was doing.
like, sure, let's keep doing this.
Yeah, basically. And eventually he got out of the Navy. It was like literally only like a year or two later. Okay. So he gets out of the Navy. It's only been a couple years. I don't know. I didn't see anything about like why he was discharged from the Navy. I don't know if it was just like a natural end to his enlistment or if like for some reason he got out. But when he got back, his wife, Claudia, who he seemed to have forgotten all about while he was in Vietnam, she told him that she had been having an affair basically the whole time he'd been gone and that she wanted a divorce because she wanted to be with this other guy. And so she broke up
Good
with him
for her.
basically.
Not that
Yeah.
you should have affairs with people, but
No.
I don't
But
know. It feels a
honestly,
little
he was doing
different
it
when your
too,
husband's a
so
serial killer. So
yeah, it really does. It hits different because you know that he turns out to be a real monster. So, you know, you got to just see it through that perspective. She
yeah, it doesn't
escaped
feel that
basically.
bad.
Yeah. And basically he didn't seem to care that much about it. Like he wasn't like he was upset, but he wasn't like this is the end of the world, my heart is broken. It was more just like he was angry and then they just kind of broke up amicably and they never really saw each other again. So, when he was done with the Navy, he started working for a company called Kenworth Trucking Company. You've probably heard of it.
Yeah,
It's a pretty big trucking
yep.
company.
I've seen that one.
Yep. And he worked as a truck painter basically his whole career. That's what he did. For the longest time, I thought that he drove trucks because that's just what my mind went to when I heard Kenworth Trucking Company. He was not a truck driver. He
He
painted
painted
trucks for
them.
the company. So
Interesting.
it's kind of a weird thing, but that's what he did. And after his marriage with Claudia ended in 1972, they were married for like 3 years. Um, it took him less than a year to get hitched again. He married Marcia Winslow in 1973, and their marriage started out pretty normal. She didn't have much to complain about at the beginning. Eventually, they had a son that they named Matthew, and during their marriage, Ridgway started to display some weird behavior. He got super religiously fanatic, if
Oh,
you will. He
perfect.
started
Yeah.
he started like going door to door proselytizing and like he would read the Bible out loud at home and at work and just like weird stuff. And he also basically forced his wife to do the same things. Like they had this really strict pastor that they like followed and he basically forced Marcia to like do everything that this pastor said. So that was just like a weird thing. And
It's
during this
such a
time Marcia
weird
said,
thing.
"No, it is such a weird
Like the
thing."
fact that somebody that like is, according to him, killed people at this point is like now like because like I don't know. You look at any religion and that's definitely against the belief system
Yeah,
in any religion. Ain't nobody smiling down on the murderers, being like, "Good job. Yep,
you're
that's what
doing
you're supposed to be
great
doing."
work. Well, that's what's so weird about it is like and on top of that, even though he was married to Marcia, he was still sleeping with sex workers
Of course he was.
like all the time.
Why would he not?
Which is also like one of the biggest things that they talk about in any religion is like you don't have any form of adultery
Sexual
of any kind.
relationship with anybody
Sexual
outside your
relations
spouse.
outside of your marriage is not
Like that's
okay.
what the Bible teaches.
Yeah. So, and that's like during this time his ex-wife Marcia, she said that he would cry during sermons or while he was reading the Bible at home, like all the time. So it was almost like, it almost seems like he was remorseful or like guilty or something, but like not, because he wasn't changing his behavior or trying to be better. He was just like weirdly obsessed with like the Bible and with this weird like religion thing. And it didn't last forever. Like it was just like a weird phase he went through.
Yeah, it almost seems to me like he was almost like trying to purge himself of his desires
Yeah,
in a
like
weird
he was
way. You know what I
having
mean?
weird
Like
stuff.
he had come to terms with like the fact that he wasn't normal and it wasn't, I don't know, like
Good.
acceptable, his
Yeah.
desires. But he like also was like overcorrecting.
Well, and it also seemed like he was preemptively doing like penance for something that he knew he was going to do. It was like he
Yeah.
decided who like he was going to act on it, on all the urges he was having, and he was like pre-repenting or something, which is just not, it's just
Mm.
not normal. It's not normal behavior. I
It's
don't
also
know.
not how it works. Like,
No.
reading the Bible is not gonna cancel out murder.
Murder.
I don't
No,
think in
it's
any
not.
religion they're gonna be like, yeah, sure, read the Bible. You're all goods.
Really. Really. Just do like a few Hail Marys, as they say, and you'll be fine. No, it's yeah, it's a weird thing he went through because it literally just it lasted like a year, and then he just never ever did it ever again. He never went to church again. He never read the Bible again. It was just like a weird moment he had. Another thing that was weird in their marriage was that Marcia said later he had like an insatiable appetite for sex. She could not keep up with it. It was very intense. And eventually it became so much that like she basically left him over it. But there was like
Gee,
a
that is
specific
intense.
circumstance that happened that she was like, "No, we're done. We're not doing this anymore." He would demand like sex like several times a day, not just once, but multiple times a day. And he would want to have sex in public places where they could very
Ew.
easily be caught.
Yeah.
And I know that that's like a thing that some people do, but like she was not into it. She did not want to do it.
Well, that's
So
the
it was
issue. I'm
very
like, if
much
you're both
coerced.
into that kink, then great. But if you're not into that, that's
No,
uncomfy.
it's uncomfortable.
So
And you shouldn't have to do something you don't want to do, but she felt like she had to. He coerced her into doing a lot of this stuff. And he also had like this thing with bondage, which makes sense because he's a serial killer. So, um, she didn't, like I said, she did not like this at all, but she said that she wanted to make him happy because when she didn't go along with it, he got upset. So, on one of these occasions when bondage was part of what they were doing, he like took it way too far and legitimately tried to strangle her. And she said that
yeah.
she actually thought he was trying to kill her.
Well, he
And
probably
so she
was
left
for
him.
a minute.
That's why she left. I think I think he was thinking about it. I think he was like, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And he later actually said that he thought about killing her but decided against it. It's like, "Oh, okay. All
Yeah.
right. That's your wife. What was your plan?" Clearly there wasn't one.
Whatever. Whatever.
Anyway, so they
Well,
were
I'm glad
divorced
that she
and
made it out.
yeah, I'm glad she
Good
did
for
too
her.
cuz it was a close
That's
call.
a good move.
Yes. She was like, "You're the worst," and they got divorced. It was 1981. So after the divorce, they had a child together. So Ridgway had to pay child support, and he was upset about that because
Because
I
you wanted to have
guess
sex 3 times a day, and
I
you think
don't
nothing
know.
was gonna come of that? Come on, man.
Yeah, I don't know. He was upset about the child support thing, and he was actually said that he was angry enough that he considered killing her again, but again decided not to do it. Okay.
Gee.
All right.
Oh, okay.
I feel like he just realized that wouldn't solve his problem. Just because you kill her doesn't mean you're not going to have to support your
like
child.
then you're
So,
responsible for the child,
yeah,
like
exactly.
wholeheartedly.
So,
Yeah.
great.
Also, but I love how he's just contemplating who deserves to live. He's like playing God.
Literally,
He's
like
like,
he has the power and
hmm,
authority to decide when
I'm
and
just
how people
gonna,
die.
yeah, I'm just gonna decide if you're worthy of life anymore. What
You
a
made me
freaking
angry, so
reject.
therefore I'm going to kill you. Whatever.
What
Yeah,
a
and that's
literal
basically his
psychopath.
whole thing. He's a crazy person. He just yeah, like honestly, he really didn't understand why he did what he did. He said that multiple times to investigators later on. He could not explain it. They were like, "Why? Why did you do this?" And he was like, "I don't know. I don't know." It's like, "Okay. All right. You just like decided to kill people and so you killed people." It was wild. Anyways, so after his second marriage ended, he became like really obsessed with sex workers. Like he'd already kind of had this weird thing with sex workers basically since forever, but he started talking about sex work around people at work, to his neighbors, just like in a way that made everybody uncomfortable. He was crossing all the social boundaries. There was like nothing normal about what he was saying. And he started complaining to like anybody that would listen about this group of sex workers that hung around his neighborhood. Um, but that didn't stop him from using their services like all the time. But he decided to
Yeah,
like complain about them to
yeah.
everyone.
You can't
So,
have your cake and eat it too, bud.
no, you can't.
Pick a
It's not how it
lane.
works. Ridiculous. So, for the next 7 years, he would be single. He didn't get married until 1988. And during this gap in time, this is when most of his crimes took place. That he took his weird obsession with sex workers to like a very deadly level here. So, in 1982, like a year after Marcia divorced Ridgway, the city of Seattle was basically falling into a panic because there was a serial killer on the loose, and it was Ridgway, duh. But they didn't know that. So, on August 15th of 1982, a detective named Dave Reichert, it seems kind of
Rickard.
Frenchy, Reichert, he was a detective with the King County Sheriff's Office, and he was called to a murder scene. This murder scene was troubling because earlier in the month, more bodies had been found in this same area. So, a call had been placed to police reporting that there were two bodies floating in the Green River on the morning of August 15th in 1982. And when authorities got there, there were two bodies that they easily located, but when they searched the scene they actually found a third body on the bank of the river. So there was three women, and
Holy
2
cow.
weeks earlier they'd found two other women like
That
further
is
downriver.
so many in such a
That's
short amount of
5.
time.
That's 5 in like a month basically. So they were eventually able to identify these women as Wendy Lee Cofield, who was 16, and Deborah Bonner, who was 23. And then there was Marcia Chapman, who was 31, Cynthia Hines, who was 17, and Opal Mills, who was 16.
Oh my gosh,
And
they're
they were
so
all sex
young.
workers. Yes. So
How
young.
do you get into sex work that young?
It's so
That
sad.
breaks
It
my
happens
heart.
all the time. Like
I
people,
know.
a lot of these girls, like I can't, because there's so many victims in this case, I can't go into all of their backstories. But a lot of these girls, especially the young ones, had terrible home lives and they ran away, and the only thing they could do to support themselves was sex work. It was the only way they could
That
make
just
money.
breaks my heart.
And
It's so
so
sad.
and a lot of them were
What
into
a
drugs and
terrible
things like that.
reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's horrible that he preyed on these like really vulnerable, damaged people that just like it's just terrible. It's really terrible. So after like finding all of these bodies and investigating the scenes, they learned that basically all of them were found naked, with something tied around their neck or with ligature marks around their neck. So, for instance, Wendy, she was found with jeans tied around her neck, and Deborah was also found like strangled, just like the other ones, but she didn't have any clothes on her body. So, just like it was pretty apparent that they'd all died in the same way. But most of the actual physical evidence had washed away because they were in the water, which is like, if you want to get away with murder, dump them in the water somewhere because it will get rid of all the evidence for you. It's horrible that
Yeah.
he knew that he was like clearly not dumb because he was smart enough to know that
Not
that
dumb
was the
enough
best way.
to get caught
Like,
early.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And basically, the public, this whole thing happening, the public and the press just like freaked out, which makes sense because that's terrifying. Like, I'm trying to picture what that would be like if I heard that 5 random people showed up, like turned up dead in a river in my town. Like, I would freak out. I'd never go outside ever again. Like, no, thank you. That's
It's a lot of
horrible.
people, especially in
It's
a
a lot of
small amount of
people.
time.
Yeah. So, anyways, fear and panic everywhere, and lots of pressure coming down on the police to figure out what's going on. And so a task force was organized to kind of head up this investigation. And Detective Reichert, who was the one that was on the scene, for the first time, he like kind of became the leader of this task force. And there were 25 detectives assigned to this task force. So this is like a big deal. They're putting a lot of
Yeah.
resources into this.
Well, good. They should.
And yeah. And they did the best. I honestly think like this task force at least did the best that they knew how to do. I don't think generally every person that was ever involved with these women that disappeared did their best work, but this task force seemed to at least try. Um, they'd gone to the FBI because they wanted a profile of like who this person was, like the kind of person they were looking for, and they got a profile from the FBI. And this was back when this was brand new, these profiles, the FBI profiles. It was new information. So they were like excited about it. Um and they got some good like basis information, but like not all of it was accurate, as we'll learn. But they were able to like kind of get some stuff from it. So that's good. After the autopsies on the 5 women were done, they, like I said, they knew that they had like zero forensic evidence to work with. They had nothing. And so they started looking into the victims' backgrounds, and they realized that they'd have to kind of rely on witnesses to kind of get anywhere with this case. And the problem with that was that sex workers aren't known to be super like cooperative with police for good reason, because
Yeah.
they get arrested when they work with police. You know, like you can't have it both ways, because their work is
Right.
illegal, and they don't want to get in trouble because they need to work to live. So it just kind of stalled the investigation in a big way because nobody was willing to talk to them at this point. Like nobody wanted to help because they didn't want to get in trouble. So they tried. They canvassed this area that's known as the Strip, that was like a common spot for sex workers to hang around and try and get work. And they literally talked to anybody who would talk to them, but they got nowhere. And they hoped that like maybe someday someone would come forward, but nobody did. So they started going to the public in general and just asking for tips on anybody that kind of fit the profile that they'd gotten from FBI, and like the things that they did know, like somebody that hung around sex workers a lot or things like that. They just wanted to like see if the public had any information. And so the public tried to help, and they were getting antsy because no answers were being found by police. So they started getting tips and stuff like that. But the public was also pretty judgmental of how police were handling the case. And they like kind of accused them of not putting that much effort into it because of the victimology, because the victims were
Because they were
sex
sex
workers.
workers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's probably true for some of the people working that case. I think that's just how it is. Um, Unfortunately, I think that's how a lot, especially back in the 80s. Yeah, I think that was probably an issue. And Detective Reichert, he said later, like, that was not how he felt about the situation at all. He said, quote, "When you collect a human body, especially someone so young, when your job is to collect human remains, you can't help but place a high value on every life," end quote. So it seemed like there were some good detectives like trying to do their best work here, but it still just wasn't getting them anywhere. So, with the help of the public, they started getting tips, and one tip would prove to be a little bit useful. But we're actually going to stop there for this episode, and we'll pick it up next week and talk about what happened and the suspects and things like that. So, sorry to cut it off in the middle of the story here, but it's too long to put in one episode.
Cutting off on the most intense part, leaving us hanging.
Yeah. You gotta leave a
for a
cliffhanger.
whole week.
Keep the people coming back for more. So, yep. That's it. That's the beginning
That
of
was the
Gary
beginning.
Ridgway.
Gary Ridgway.
There we have it.
Psychopath. Disgusting, disturbed man.
Really
Gary
disturbed. Literally. Tip of the week, if you see a man with dead shark eyes, just turn around and walk the other way. Every
you can
time.
never be too safe.
You can never be too safe.
Agreed.
All right, Eve. Talk to you next week.
Stay frosty, y'all. Stay frosty.
Bye.